The day it all came crashing down didn't start with rain. It started with sirens. The kind that echoed through the valley, bouncing off the million-dollar homes that lined the private road like soldiers guarding a secret. Only this time, the secret wasn't staying buried. I stood on the edge of my porch, boots sinking into what used to be dry soil, now a gray-brown swamp, watching water boil up from the earth like it was angry. It pushed through the grass, filling backyards, swallowing flower beds, even creeping toward the fancy basketball court the HOA president bragged about in every neighborhood meeting. But the worst part? It was heading straight for their houses. The $6 million mansions with their polished driveways, outdoor kitchens, infinity pools, all slowly being claimed by water. The concrete they poured into my creek last summer, the one they swore would improve drainage, was now a dam choking the valley. The water had nowhere else to go. It was like the land itself had decided to get revenge. I could hear shouting from the big house on the hill. Mrs. Devereaux's place. She was the HOA president, queen of the cul-de-sac, and self-appointed keeper of community standards. She was out there in her silk robe and rain boots, barking orders at two landscapers who looked like they wanted to quit on the spot. "The pumps!" she yelled. "Get the pumps going!" Only there was no pump big enough for this. The storm water was rising fast, and I watched with a strange mix of anger and satisfaction as it started lapping at her precious stone patio. The same patio where, last July, she laughed at me in front of the whole neighborhood for owning a shack with a ditch out back. That ditch, my creek, ran behind every single property here. It used to carry stormwater safely to the river beyond the hills, until the HOA filled it with concrete. Now their homes were sitting in a bowl of water with no way out. But here's the thing. I hadn't told them yet. I hadn't told them that the creek, the one they ruined, didn't belong to the HOA. It belonged to me. And that little fact was about to turn this whole nightmare into something far worse for them than just a flood. But to understand how we got here, how my quiet life turned into this circus of lawyers, backhoes, and angry millionaires, you need to know what happened last summer, when it all began with one meeting, one vote, and one very big mistake. Because what they did wasn't just stupid. It was personal. Last June feels like a lifetime ago now. Back then the grass was green, the sky was clear, and I still believe people could be reasonable if you gave them the chance. I was wrong. The HOA had called a special emergency meeting in the clubhouse. I wasn't technically part of the HOA. I owned my land before the development went up, so my property was separate, but they insisted on inviting me whenever the creek came up in conversation. I remember sitting in the back, baseball cap pulled low, while Mrs. Devereaux clicked through a slideshow about community beautification. Her voice was like nails on a chalkboard. "This eyesore," she said, pointing to a photo of my creek, "is holding back property values." People nodded. "And worse," she continued, "it's a mosquito breeding ground. Unsafe for children, unpleasant for guests, a complete nuisance." I shifted in my seat. That creek had been here for generations. My father used to fish in it as a boy. When I was little, I caught my first frog there. It wasn't just water. It was memory, history, life running through our land like a vein. "Therefore," she said, flashing a tight smile, "the HOA proposes we fill it with concrete, smooth it over, turn it into green space." They actually clapped. I raised my hand. "You can't do that," I said. Every head turned. "Excuse me?" she said, like I'd interrupted a Broadway show. "You can't fill in a creek," I repeated. "That water goes somewhere. You block it here, it's going to back up." She gave me the kind of smile people give stray dogs. "Sir, we've consulted a landscaper." I laughed. "A landscaper? Not an engineer? Not the county?" "This is private property," she said sharply. "We handle things ourselves." And that was when I told her the part that made the room go quiet. "That creek," I said slowly, "isn't yours to handle." She blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "It's on my land," I said. "Runs right through it. Always has." But they didn't care. By July, trucks were rolling in, big ones, dumping load after load of concrete into the channel behind my house. I filmed everything, called the county, even tried reasoning with them one last time. "Mrs. Devereaux," I said, standing at her gate as the cement mixers roared, "this is a mistake." She didn't even look at me, just waved her hand like I was a fly buzzing around her martini. "Go home," she said. "It's already decided." It wasn't until September that the rains came. The first storm filled every gutter in the neighborhood, but the water didn't leave. It couldn't. The creek was gone, sealed under 3 feet of gray death. By October, backyards were soft underfoot. Lawns turned yellow. Trees leaned where their roots were drowning. And now, in November, the valley was a swamp, and the mansions were sinking. I wish I could tell you I felt sorry for them. But standing there on my porch, watching the water crawl higher, hearing the panic in their voices as the reality hit, that their dream homes were sitting in a disaster of their own making, I just sipped my coffee. Because this wasn't even the worst of it. Not yet. The county trucks were coming, the lawsuits, the news crews. And I hadn't even told them about the paperwork that proved the creek was mine. And so was the land they'd just destroyed. Before I tell you what happened when I finally dropped that bomb, let me introduce you to the main players in this circus. There was Mrs. Devereaux, of course, Queen Bee, HOA president, and self-proclaimed expert on everything. Her husband Tom mostly stayed quiet, probably because he was busy running his real estate empire and pretending he didn't live in a disaster zone. Then there was Brian, the HOA treasurer, who once told me my old pickup lowered the neighborhood aesthetic. He drove a Mercedes. And finally there was me, Jake Turner, 48, mechanic, son of the man who owned this land before it turned into a playground for people with more money than sense. And right now, I was the only one who knew just how bad things were about to get. But I'll tell you this. The next thing that happened made even me step back. Because that night, as the water kept rising, one of those $1 million homes gave a sound like the earth itself was cracking. And then it started to slide. Right toward the swamp. Where are you watching from? And what would you have done if the HOA poured concrete into your creek? The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard before. Half thunder, half scream. It ripped through the night air, stopping everyone in their tracks. We all turned toward the big house on the far side of the cul-de-sac, the one with the glass walls and infinity pool that had been on the cover of Modern Living magazine last year. The house everyone whispered about because it had cost nearly $6 million and had a wine cellar bigger than most apartments in town. Now the earth beneath it was moving. It started slow, just a soft groan, as the waterlogged ground shifted under the weight of all that concrete and steel. Then, like a scene out of a movie, the whole slope gave way. Mud, water, and landscaping tumbled into the darkness, carrying pieces of patio furniture, the gleaming white fence, even one of those perfect garden statues someone imported from Italy. You can't fill in a creek, I repeated. That water goes somewhere. You block it here, it's gonna back up. She gave me the kind of smile people give stray dogs. Sir, we've consulted a landscaper. I laughed. A landscaper? Not an engineer? Not the county? This is private property, she said sharply. We handle things ourselves. And that was when I told her the part that made the room go quiet. That creek, I said slowly, isn't yours to handle. She blinked. I beg your pardon? It's on my land, I said. Runs right through it, always has. But they didn't care. By July, trucks were rolling in. Big ones, dumping load after load of concrete into the channel behind my house. I filmed everything, called the county, even tried reasoning with them one last time. Mrs. Devereaux, I said, standing at her gate as the cement mixers roared, this is a mistake. She didn't even look at me, just waved her hand like I was a fly buzzing around her martini. Go home, she said. It's already decided. It wasn't until September that the rains came. The first storm filled every gutter in the neighborhood, but the water didn't leave. It couldn't. The creek was gone, sealed under 3 feet of gray death. By October, backyards were soft underfoot, lawns turned yellow, trees leaned where their roots were drowning. And now, in November, the valley was a swamp, and the mansions were sinking. I wish I could tell you I felt sorry for them. But standing there on my porch, watching the water crawl higher, hearing the panic in their voices as the reality hit, that their dream homes were sitting in a disaster of their own making, I just sipped my coffee. Because this wasn't even the worst of it. Not yet. The county trucks were coming, the lawsuits, the news crews, and I hadn't even told them about the paperwork that proved the creek was mine. And so was the land they just destroyed. Before I tell you what happened when I finally dropped that bomb, let me introduce you to the main players in this circus. There was Mrs. Devereaux, of course, Queen Bee, HOA president and self-proclaimed expert on everything. Her husband Tom mostly stayed quiet, probably because he was busy running his real estate empire and pretending he didn't live in a disaster zone. Then there was Brian, the HOA treasurer, who once told me my old pickup lowered the neighborhood aesthetic. He drove a Mercedes. And finally, there was me, Jake Turner, 48, mechanic, son of the man who owned this land before it turned into a playground for people with more money than sense. And right now, I was the only one who knew just how bad things were about to get. But I'll tell you this. The next thing that happened made even me step back. Because that night, as the water kept rising, one of those $1 million homes gave a sound like the earth itself was cracking. And then it started to slide, right toward the swamp. Where are you watching from? And what would you have done if the HOA poured concrete into your creek? The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard before. Half thunder, half scream. It ripped through the night air, stopping everyone in their tracks. We all turned toward the big house on the far side of the cul-de-sac. The one with the glass walls and infinity pool that had been on the cover of Modern Living magazine last year. The house everyone whispered about because it had cost nearly $6 million and had a wine cellar bigger than most apartments in town. Now the earth beneath it was moving. It started slow, just a soft groan as the waterlogged ground shifted under the weight of all that concrete and steel. Then, like a scene out of a movie, the whole slope gave way. Mud, water, and landscaping tumbled into the darkness, carrying pieces of patio furniture, the gleaming white fence, even one of those perfect garden statues someone imported from Italy, and the house. It slid with it. Not fast, not like an avalanche. No, this was worse. Slow enough that you could hear the windows crack one by one. Slow enough that you could see the lights flicker inside as the whole foundation tilted toward the swamp. People screamed. Someone yelled to call 911. I just stood there, coffee mug frozen halfway to my mouth, watching the universe deliver a punchline so sharp it almost didn't feel real. This was the nightmare they had built with their own hands, one cement truck at a time. And the thing was, this was only the beginning. You have to understand something about this neighborhood. It wasn't just any collection of houses. It was the place in town. Doctors, lawyers, tech executives. People who wanted to live 5 minutes from the city but pretend they were in some kind of countryside retreat. The kind of place where kids rode matching electric scooters and every mailbox had the same shade of rustic chic paint, because the HOA said so. But under all that polish was a streak of arrogance a mile wide. Take Mrs. Devereaux, for example. She wasn't born rich, everyone knew that, but she married into it and then turned this neighborhood into her personal kingdom. Block parties, rule books, landscaping inspections. Nothing happened without her approval. And the creek? She hated it. Said it was messy and unsightly. But really, I think it bothered her because it reminded her she didn't control everything. That water had been cutting through this land long before the first brick of her mansion was laid. She couldn't stand that. So, last summer, she convinced the HOA to fill it in, said it would unify the community. Now here we were, watching $6 million of unity sink into the mud. I heard sirens in the distance, the volunteer fire department most likely. Out here, we didn't have fancy city crews, just neighbors with pickup trucks and hoses who tried their best when things went bad, but nothing in their training manual covered mansion sliding into a swamp. As people ran toward the house, slipping in the mud, shouting over the roar of rushing water, I stayed where I was, because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't just about the rain. It was about the creek, the one they buried, the one that used to carry storms like this safely to the river. Without it, the whole valley had turned into a bathtub, and now the water was coming for everything they thought was untouchable. I remember the day they finished pouring the concrete, July 18th, hot as blazes. The trucks left behind a flat gray scar where the water used to run. Mrs. Devereaux threw a little celebration on her patio that night. Catered food, string lights, people drinking wine while the last of the mud dried on the boots of the workers who'd just killed the creek. I didn't go, of course. But I heard the music drifting across the valley as I sat on my porch, staring at what used to be a living thing, and was now just dead. It felt like losing a friend. My dad used to tell me the creek had a voice if you listened close enough. That in spring, when the water ran high, it laughed over the rocks. In summer, it hummed low and easy. In winter, it whispered under the ice. Now it was silent. And that silence settled in my chest like a stone. When the fire trucks finally arrived, red lights flashing against the rain, the house had stopped sliding, but it was leaning like a drunk against the edge of the swamp. The ground around it bubbled with water, dark and angry. One firefighter muttered something about ground saturation and hydrostatic pressure, but I could see in his face he didn't have a clue how to fix this. You can't fight water when it decides to move. And this water was moving. That night, as they evacuated the family from the mansion, and neighbors whispered about insurance policies and foundation repairs, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the old metal box my dad left me when he passed. Inside were the property deeds, faded papers with official stamps, maps drawn back when things were measured in chains and rods instead of feet and inches. And right there, in black and white, was the line showing the creek cutting through my land. Mine. Not the HOA's, not the county's. Mine. They hadn't just filled in a waterway. They'd trespassed, destroyed property that didn't belong to them. And tomorrow, when I took these papers to the county office, things were going to get very, very interesting. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, the storm kept pounding the valley. By midnight, The mansion wasn't the only house in trouble. Water pooled in driveways. Basements flooded. The expensive stone entrance sign the HOA was so proud of? Half underwater. And still the rain came. I stood at my window, watching headlights snake through the neighborhood as people tried to move cars to higher ground. I even saw Brian, the HOA treasurer, wading through knee-deep water in his fancy golf shorts, yelling at someone on his phone about liability. Lightning split the sky. The air smelled like mud and panic. And through it all, I just kept thinking about that meeting last summer. About how they laughed when I said this was a mistake. About how Mrs. Devereaux waved me off like I was nothing. Well, tomorrow she was going to find out just how much of a nothing I wasn't. Still, I'll give them this. Rich folks know how to cling to denial. The next morning, with the storm finally gone and the valley looking like the Everglades, the HOA held another meeting. In the clubhouse, of course. Because nothing says we're in control like coffee and pastries while your neighborhood sinks. I walked in late, muddy boots and all. Heads turned. Mrs. Devereaux stood at the front, hair perfect again, voice calm like she wasn't standing in front of a disaster. We need a recovery plan, she was saying. Pumps, insurance claims, maybe even a fundraiser. I actually laughed out loud. A fundraiser? I said. What are you going to do, sell brownies to pay for the mansion in the swamp? She glared at me. This is a serious matter, Mr. Turner. Oh, I know, I said. Very serious, especially since you built this mess on land that isn't yours. The room went quiet. Dead quiet. And right then, I laid the deed on the table. This, I said, tapping the map with one muddy finger, is the creek. My creek. Been in my family since before this subdivision was even a twinkle in some developer's eye. And you? You filled it in. A murmur rolled through the room. Which means, I said, letting the words hang like thunder. Every bit of damage out there. Every flooded yard. Every sinking foundation. That's on you. I could see it hit them one by one. The realization that this wasn't just about water anymore. It was about lawsuits. About money. About blame. And as faces paled and voices rose, I stood there in the middle of their shiny clubhouse thinking, this was about to get good. But before the lawyers, before the county inspectors, before the news vans showed up, something happened that afternoon none of us expected. Something that made the sliding mansion look like a warm-up act. Because as the sun finally came out, and people stepped outside to survey the damage, a sound like the earth itself splitting rolled across the valley, and this time it wasn't just one house, it was three. Sliding. All at once. Right toward the swamp. 3 houses moved at once like slow ships breaking free of their ropes. You could hear the deep crack of wood, the pop of nails, the soft scream of glass. Porch lights swung like little moons as the ground let go. One roof line dipped, another twisted. The third slid straight forward, the front steps vanishing into brown water. People shouted names. A dog howled from somewhere inside. The air tasted like wet dirt and fear. Back! Everyone back! A firefighter yelled, waving his arms. Ground's not stable. I ran anyway. Not to the houses, I'm not stupid, but toward the family stumbling through the water. A kid lost one shoe and started crying. I scooped him up without asking and set him on the hood of a pickup that was still on high ground. Name? I asked. Eli, he sniffed. You stay right there, Eli. Hold that antenna like a cowboy, I said, trying to make him smile. You did great. A woman waded past me, both arms up, holding a clear storage bin like it was a baby. Inside were paper files, a wedding photo, and a folded American flag. Her lips trembled. Ma'am, I said, taking the bin. I got this. Keep your hands free. Thank you, she breathed. I'm Paige. Jake, I said. We'll put this in my truck. Behind us, the first house groaned again. The ground burped out a bubble of trapped air, and the front porch sank with a slurp, like the earth was drinking it. The German shepherd on that porch barked until the boards tipped, then leaped, splash, into chest-deep water, and started paddling in a circle, panicked. I've got him, I yelled. Cooper, Cooper, a man cried, splashing after the dog and sinking to his knees. I tossed the bin onto my truck bed, grabbed a coil of rope, and jogged along the edge where the grass still held. Cooper, here, boy. I whistled and slapped my knee. The dog spun and swam toward me, eyes wide. He couldn't find a place to climb out. I dropped to my stomach, reached as far as I could, and felt his slick fur under my fingers. Easy. Gotcha, good boy. I hooked the rope like a sling under his chest, planted my boots, and dragged him up the muddy bank. The dog shook, soaking me head to toe, then pressed his body against my legs like I was a tree in a storm. The man who'd yelled for him rushed up, grabbed my shoulder, and choked out, Thank you. God, thank you. Leash? I asked. He fumbled one out of his pocket, hands shaking. I helped clip it on and gave the dog one last ear rub. You hang on to each other, I said. We turned together at a new sound, a slow, wet crack. The second house's garage door buckled inward. Water gushed out, carrying storage bins, a red tricycle, a rake, Christmas lights, and a gas can that bobbed like a deadly apple. A firefighter lunged and snagged the can with a pike pole before it could smack a live transformer box. Kill power to the lower road, the fire chief shouted into his radio. I want that line dead 5 minutes ago. Headlights crawled down the entrance like a nervous snake. More fire trucks, an ambulance, a sheriff's SUV. A news van from Channel 7 bounced over the speed humps and stopped at the first pool of water. The camera guy stepped out, took one look at his shoes, and got right back in. Someone grabbed my arm. It was Brian, the HOA treasurer, wearing a soaked golf polo and that same clipped tone he used at meetings. Jake, you have to move your truck. The pumps are coming. We're staging here. I stared at him. The pumps. Brian, open your eyes. This whole bowl is full because you all killed the creek. A few pumps won't move a lake. He jabbed a finger at my chest. This is not the time for your attitude. We need your cooperation. Buddy, I said, stepping close. You're getting my cooperation. I just pulled your neighbor's dog and his kid out of soup. But if you want my truck to move, you say please. For a long second, we just looked at each other with mud on our faces and sirens in our ears. Then his shoulders sagged. Please, he said quietly. Can you move the truck? Yeah, I said, and waved him to follow. Help me throw these bins in the cab so they stay dry. We lifted Paige's box and 2 more that someone thrust at us. As we worked, I kept thinking one clear thought that felt like a steel rod through the noise. Be the neighbor you wish they had been to you. Not because they deserve it, but because that's who you are. The third house shuddered. A little boy on the lawn screamed for his grandmother. A firefighter scooped him up and handed him to a paramedic. The paramedic whispered, "You're safe," like a spell. I backed my truck to higher ground and came running back with 2 wool blankets, a thermos of coffee, and a roll of contractor garbage bags, the poor man's raincoat. I tore holes in the corners and handed them out like ponchos. Thanks, muttered a man in a soaked button-down. No problem, I said. Bag couture, very in this season. He barked a surprised laugh. It wasn't much, but sound carries differently in a crisis. Laughter, any laugh, tells your bones the world hasn't ended. The sliding slowed as the rain finally eased into a cold mist. The 3 houses didn't fall. They leaned, twisted, buckled, and then held. Barely. Lines ran from roof peaks to old oaks where firefighters cinched them with webbing like a movie stunt. It looked ridiculous, and also perfect. Humans tying hope to trees. By dawn, the storm was gone, and the valley looked like somebody had poured chocolate milk over a postcard and then dragged a rake through it. Cars canted at odd angles. A garden shed floated sideways across a lawn and smashed into a trampoline that sat half-sunk like a sad drum. The HOA's stone entrance sign peeked above the floodwater like a shark fin. I checked on Eli, who sat in the back of the pickup under a blanket, holding that antenna like I told him. His mom, Paige, stood beside him, one hand on his head, eyes red. You 2 hungry? I asked. We haven't even thought about it, she said. Good, I said. I'll do the thinking. I've got oatmeal, peanut butter, and a stove that doesn't mind getting dirty. You're too kind, she said. It's not kindness, I said, pouring coffee into the thermos lid and handing it to her. It's what my dad taught me. When water rises, neighbors rise higher. She blinked hard and nodded. The fire chief, Miller, a big guy with kind eyes, walked over. Turner, you know this land better than anyone. We need dry ground for triage and gear. My barn, I said. Top of my hill. Dry as a bone. He grinned. Show me. We started a line. People carried boxes, towels, cases of water from the trucks. I fired up my old generator and ran a cord to a folding table so folks could charge phones. Someone brought a big pot of soup. Someone else brought dog food. A teacher from the next street, Emily Carson, set up a sign-in sheet and started matching needs to helpers like she'd been waiting her whole life for a real problem to solve. And I kept moving. Fix a rope, lift a bin, point a truck, find a blanket, speak a soft word. Forgiveness doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's just the next small right thing, done again and again, until your own heart is steady. By mid-morning, the county showed up. 2 white trucks with seals on the doors and 3 people in boots that looked new. A county environmental officer named Rita Morales, a hydrologist named Dr. Aaron Patel, and a young engineer whose name tag said Lucy. Rita went straight to the edge of the drowned creek, hands on hips, eyes scanning the gray ribbon of illegal concrete that ran under the tea-colored water like a bone. Who authorized this? She asked no one, and everyone at once. A small knot of HOA board members gathered like students who hadn't done their homework. Mrs. Devereaux had changed into a crisp navy windbreaker and a face that tried to look calm and landed on brittle. Our landscaper advised us, she began. Rita held up her palm. A landscaper doesn't sign permits. We were told, Brian tried. By who? Dr. Patel asked, kneeling to lift a corner of sod where water boiled up from beneath. A county hydrology plan would have required flow modeling. This is a valley with a known conveyance channel. You poured a plug in a bathtub. It's private property, Tom Devereaux said stiffly. We're within our rights. Lucy, the engineer, took a folded paper from her clipboard. Sir, the waterway recorded on the 1978 plat is a jurisdictional feature. Private ownership doesn't remove environmental regulation. I walked up and set my old metal deed box on the tailgate. And the channel runs through my parcels, I said. You can check these, the creek's been ours since my grandfather they trespassed and filled it. Rita looked at me, then at the fire chief, then back at the sprawl of wet luxury. She blew out a breath that steamed in the cold air. All right, she said. Here's what happens next. We're issuing an emergency order to stop pumping into the lower road and to stabilize the failed slopes. We'll open a bypass to relieve pressure, then we'll start a removal plan. But be very clear. There will be fines, and there will be investigations. If concrete was poured without a waterway permit, if material entered a protected corridor, that's serious. You can't be serious, Mrs. Devereaux said, incredulous. We are the victims here. Rita's eyebrows lifted by a hair. Ma'am, the victims are the people standing in my triage line. The land is a victim. The river downstream is a victim. Laws don't exist to make your backyard pretty. I almost felt sorry for Mrs. Devereaux then. Almost. But the feeling that won was something softer. Relief that grown-ups had finally arrived to say the obvious thing that nobody wanted to hear. Dr. Patel walked with me along the edge, careful steps, eyes on the water. You warned them? He asked. At the meeting, I said. Told them water had to go somewhere. He nodded. It always remembers. Is there a way to fix it without making it worse? I asked. There's always a way, he said. It just costs more once pride has had its turn. We marked a spot behind my barn where an old, shallow side channel used to run years back. The plan was to cut a small relief trench there with the county backhoe, just enough to lower the bathtub a few inches and take pressure off the 3 leaning houses. Short term only, Lucy said, pencil moving on her pad. Long term is full removal and restoration. Native plants, rock grade control, maybe a small step pool sequence. We'll need your cooperation. You'll have it, I said. We set the work window for early afternoon when the road crew could bring barricades. For a few hours, the valley felt like a job site instead of a disaster. People carried sandbags and stacked them at the toes of slopes. Volunteers in bright vests knocked on doors to check on elderly neighbors. The high school football team showed up and did what football teams do best. Lift heavy things and take orders without ego. Emily ran supplies like a field general. The generator hummed. A kid with a guitar played soft songs under the barn eave, and for 10 minutes at a time you could forget that 3 houses were held up by straps and good wishes. It was a lovely low after a wild high. And in that quiet, people saw each other new. Tom Devereaux carried cases of water and didn't complain once. Brian helped an old man rinse mud off a Purple Heart medal with bottled water and his own handkerchief. Paige hugged me and told Eli to thank me out loud, which he did with a serious face and sticky fingers. If you've never watched a neighborhood relearn how to be a neighborhood, it looks like this. One person decides to help, then 2, then 10, and suddenly kindness is the only rule that matters. You don't need a bylaw for it. You just do it. Just before noon, my friend Pastor Mike rattled up with a trailer full of folding tables from the church and a big metal coffee urn that smelled like hope. He didn't ask permission. He just started pouring. Didn't know if we'd be welcome, he said to me under his breath, glancing toward the HOA crowd. You're welcome if you love people, I said. The rest will sort later. He grinned. That I can do. We were 2 cups into a quiet minute when the pumps arrived. Big diesel pumps with hoses as thick as a man's leg, hauled in by a contractor the HOA had called before the county got there. 2 workers in neon shirts jumped out, climbed over the mud berm, and started laying suction lines across the yard like fire hoses. Rita strode over, hands open, voice calm but firm. Hold up, folks. We have an emergency plan. No pumping over the road. The foreman pointed at Mrs. Devereaux, who stood on a patch of high grass like a captain on a ship's bridge. Lady says to dump into the street, quickest way out. The street runs downhill to the cul-de-sac, Rita said. Every gallon you put there undermines the road base and pushes water toward those houses. We're on the clock, the foreman said, shrugging. Chief Miller stepped up beside Rita. Clocks paused, he said. You run those pumps across my road? I'll write you up for interfering with emergency operations. The foreman set his jaw, looked at his machines, looked at the chief, and thought about his day rate. He threw both hands up. Fine. You tell us where. Rita pointed to the relief trench cut we'd flagged behind my barn. There. Gentle. No more than 20% of the hose capacity. The foreman nodded and sent his guys to reposition. For a brief, shining hour, it worked. The pumps sipped the brown water from the lowest point and sent it to the relief trench. The trench burbled and carried the load into the old side channel, which stretched its legs like a long retired runner and remembered what it meant to work. You could see the pool around the leaning houses lower by inches. People cheered a little. Some cried a little. I leaned my arms on a rake handle and let my shoulders drop for the first time all day. That's when the HOA sign fell. It happened with a crunch and a sigh. The stone monument at the subdivision entrance, 2 pillars and a crossbeam with the community's name carved like a promise, had lost the dirt under its feet. The water we'd all been fighting had undercut the base, nibbled a pocket, and then taken a bite. The whole thing leaned forward, cracked across the middle, and slid into the flooded road. The wave it threw slapped a Mercedes that Brian had parked a little too close. The car rocked and then tilted, nose down, as the asphalt around the cul-de-sac drain gave way like a trapdoor and swallowed the front wheels. People gasped. Brian ran toward the car like he could hold it up with his hands. My suspension, my... He caught himself, looked up, and saw the faces of the folks carrying boxes and babies and blankets. He shut his mouth, took a breath, and then yelled, Nobody go near the road edge, it's hollow. Chief Miller nodded once, eyes on Brian with something like respect. Good call. It didn't look like much compared to houses sliding, but that sign tumbling felt like a symbol that finally told the truth out loud. The fancy face of the neighborhood couldn't stand on a lie anymore. The land had called it in. We roped off the entrance and set a sawhorse with a handwritten sign. Road closed. Rita radioed for a state inspector. Dr. Patel put his hand on the broken end of the sign and murmured, almost to himself, Gravity is patient. The afternoon wore on. We ate soup out of paper cups and stretched tarps over the leaners to keep any new drizzle from soaking into soft roof seams. The pumps kept their steady thrum. The relief trench held. For a moment, you could believe we might muscle through this without any more drama. Then the ground under the clubhouse popped. At first I thought it was a truck backfiring, a loud, dull bang, then a second. The clubhouse sits on a little knoll the developer built by shaving one hill and adding it to another. It's a handsome building, stone and cedar, big windows, a meeting room with a long table where I've been glared at many times. Around 3 o'clock there were at least 20 people inside, board members, a few residents, 2 insurance adjusters with clipboards, and a reporter who had sweet-talked his way in. I was headed toward my barn with a box of towels when I felt the ground jump under my boots. Not much, just a little hip check from the earth. I turned and saw a hairline crack run from the clubhouse steps across the sidewalk like someone had drawn on the concrete with a pencil. The crack paused, widened, and then, fast now, darted toward the corner foundation. Out! Chief Miller bellowed from across the yard, voice like a cannon. Everyone out of the clubhouse now! Move! Through the big windows I saw heads swivel. People stood, chairs scraped. The insurance guy hesitated, tried to scoop papers into his briefcase, then thought better of it and ran. The first group reached the doors and the doors stuck. The building had shifted just enough to pinch their frames. I dropped the towels, sprinted, and met the first man at the entrance. Back, I said, shoving my shoulder against the right door. It gave an inch, then 2. Kick low, I yelled. 3 of us kicked the bottom corner together. The door popped and a rush of bodies spilled into the muddy light, stumbling, gasping, blinking. Behind them, I saw her, Mrs. Devereaux, still inside, mouth open, staring at a hairline crack growing up the wall like a lightning strike in slow motion. Eloise, I shouted. Move. She didn't move. She was stuck to the spot where she'd always stood, center of the room, center of the plan, center of herself. I ran in, grabbed her elbow. We have to go. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, and in her eyes I saw fear. Yes, but also loneliness. The kind that finds you when the story you told yourself no longer matches the ground you're standing on. Come on, I said softer. We'll sort the rest later. We made it 3 steps. Then the floor said no. It was a sound I'll never forget. A long, low groan, then a series of cracks like brittle bones, and then the wood under our feet flexed. The far corner of the meeting room dropped 6 inches. A ceiling light shattered. Dust puffed from the baseboards. Jake, Chief Miller shouted from the door. He had a webbing strap in his hand and fury on his face. Get out of there! We took 2 more steps. The room tilted. The table slid. A chair rolled the wrong way. Eloise yelped, and I tightened my grip. We reached the doorway. I shoved her through and into the arms of 2 neighbors, who hauled her clear. I turned back for the reporter by the window who decided to grab his camera rather than his life. I sprinted, grabbed the strap, and yanked him toward me. Leave it. It's my... Another pop. The corner of the clubhouse, the one closest to the hill cut, dropped again and kept going. The floor surged under my feet like a wave. Now, I roared, and we ran. We cleared the threshold just as the corner of the building slumped. The earth under it had been carved too thin by the developer, then soaked through by all the trapped water. The fill gave way like a rotten tooth. The stone facing cracked with a sound like ice splitting on a lake. The meeting room floor tilted to a dangerous angle, and the big table slid across it, smashed into the far wall, and stuck there like a seesaw. Everyone stared, mouths open, hands on heads, as the clubhouse leaned. A woman cried, a man prayed, a child asked if the house was going to sleep. The pumps hummed on like distant frogs. Chief Miller started to order a full collapse perimeter, when a deeper rumble answered him from below, a hollow, hungry sound like something waking up. The ground a few feet beyond the clubhouse stairs sagged, an oval the size of a pickup, and then snapped down. A dark hole opened, wide and wet, yawning like a mouth. And right at the lip of that new hole, gripping the jamb of the bent door with white fingers, was Eloise Devereaux. She'd turned back. Maybe for her purse, maybe for a folder, maybe because the story in her head still said, I can fix this. The dirt under her heels crumbled. Eloise, I yelled, lunging. She looked up at me, eyes huge. The ground let go. She slid toward the hole. I didn't think. I just dove. My boots slid across the wet concrete as Eloise's fingers clawed at the edge. She made this awful sound, half scream, half breath, as the ground beneath her heels crumbled like wet cake. The hole wasn't huge yet, but the mud walls dripped and shifted, and whatever lay underneath was eating away at the earth like sugar and coffee. I hit the ground on my stomach, stretching one arm toward her wrist. Grab me, I yelled. Her hand shot up, cold and shaking. Our fingers locked. For a second I thought I had her, thought we were safe. Then the edge cracked again, the slab we were both lying on tilting just enough to make my stomach lurch. Rope, I shouted over my shoulder. Get me a rope. Chief Miller was already sprinting, barking orders at 2 volunteers. One tossed him a strap, the kind firefighters use for dragging people. Hold on, Eloise, I said, tightening my grip. Her eyes were wild, hair plastered to her face by rain and mud. The same woman who used to stand in HOA meetings with perfect lipstick and a voice like a queen now looked small and human and terrified. I can't, she gasped. Yes, you can. Look at me. You're fine. My boots dug into the mud, trying to find some kind of anchor. Chief Miller skidded in beside me, looped the strap across both our waists and hollered for people to pull. 3 men leaned back in unison, the strap going tight, my ribs groaning as they hauled us inch by inch toward firmer ground. Eloise's nails scraped against my wrist as the edge gave another warning crack. Almost there, I shouted. Don't let go. She didn't. Not until her hips were over the edge, then her knees, then finally the rest of her, and we both rolled onto the wet grass as the slab where we'd been lying collapsed with a final gulp. The hole widened, swallowing half the sidewalk and the HOA's rose bushes in one messy bite. People cheered, others just exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for an hour. Eloise curled on her side, arms wrapped around herself, shaking like she'd run miles. You okay? I asked, brushing mud off my arms. She nodded, but her eyes were glassy. I thought... Yeah, I said softly. Me too. The clubhouse was done. Nobody said it out loud, but we all saw the way the foundation tilted, the cracks spreading up the walls like a spider web. The building still stood, but it leaned toward the hole like it was thinking about joining it. We keep everyone back 50 feet, Chief Miller told his crew. No exceptions. I don't want a single soul inside that thing again. He pointed to the pumps, still humming near the relief trench. Drop the water line another 2 feet before dark. We stabilize as best we can and reassess tomorrow. County Officer Rita Morales was on her phone with someone higher up the chain, probably reporting the mess in official language while standing ankle-deep in reality. The news van finally inched closer, the reporter who'd nearly been swallowed now in dry clothes and ready to spin this into a headline. But I wasn't looking at any of that. I was watching Eloise, because something in her had cracked wider than the ground. She sat on a folding chair near my barn, wrapped in a blanket someone handed her, staring at nothing. Her husband, Tom, hovered close but didn't touch her. They weren't a hugging couple, at least I'd never seen them be. I walked over with 2 paper cups of coffee from Pastor Mike's big urn. Here, I said, offering one. She blinked like she hadn't noticed me before. Thanks. You sure you're all right? She nodded slowly. I didn't think it would matter this much. The clubhouse. The creek, she said, eyes still far away. I thought, I don't know, that it was just water, that we could control it. I sipped my coffee. Water doesn't like being told where to go. She gave a small, cracked laugh. Neither do you, apparently. Runs in the family, I said. She looked at me then, really looked, like maybe she was seeing the man who'd warned them instead of just the neighbor they all dismissed. I should have listened, she whispered. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence says enough. The relief trench worked. By late afternoon, the floodwater had dropped enough that the 3 leaning houses weren't moving anymore. Engineers inspected foundations, shaking their heads but saying the magic words not in immediate danger. Families moved valuables to higher ground. Volunteers carried furniture into garages on the far side of the neighborhood. People started asking the big questions. Insurance, repairs, lawsuits. But those answers would take weeks. Right now, survival came first. That evening, with the pumps finally quiet and the generator humming near my barn, we set up a row of tables for food. Emily Carson, the school teacher, had turned the chaos into something organized. Crockpots plugged into power strips, paper plates stacked, kids handing out bottled water. It felt almost normal for an hour. People laughed, traded storm stories, petted Cooper the rescued dog. Even Eloise joined us, still pale but sitting among neighbors instead of above them. For the first time, nobody cared about property values or landscaping rules. It was nice. But disasters don't wait for you to finish your sandwich. Just as the sun slipped behind the hills, Dr. Patel walked up from the relief trench with a face like bad news. We have a problem, he said. Everyone went quiet. The trench bought us time, he explained. But the soil around the filled creek bed is completely saturated. If we get another heavy rain before we remove that concrete, the whole system fails again. How bad? Chief Miller asked. Patel hesitated. Worse than today. Eloise closed her eyes like the words hit her physically. Rita Morales folded her arms. We'll fast-track the removal permit. I'll push it through tonight, but we need equipment, manpower, and funding ready by morning. Funding? Brian the treasurer asked weakly. Rita gave him a look sharp enough to cut steel. You wanted control. Now you pay for it. Tom Devereaux finally spoke, voice low but carrying. We'll cover it. All of it. Eloise turned to him, surprised. He didn't look at her. He looked at the families huddled in blankets, at the kids chasing each other in the mud, at the neighbors sharing coffee under string lights someone had salvaged from a patio. This is on us, he said simply. No one argued. Night settled over the valley with that heavy post-storm quiet that feels borrowed. Too calm, like the world is holding its breath. The pumps sat idle. The floodwater lay still, dark and wide under the moonlight. I walked the edge with a flashlight, checking the straps on the leaning houses one more time. The beams shone on broken fences, on toys half buried in silt, on the glitter of somebody's wind chime tangled in a tree. When I turned back toward my barn, I saw Eloise standing alone by the water, blanket around her shoulders, staring at the ruined clubhouse. You should rest, I said, coming up beside her. She shook her head. I can't stop hearing it. The ground giving way? She nodded. I understood. Some sounds stay with you. We stood there in silence until she finally said, What happens now? Tomorrow, I said. They bring the big machines. Tear out the concrete. Give the water back its path. And the houses? We keep them standing if we can. She pulled the blanket tighter. And if we can't? I didn't answer. Because right then from somewhere deep under the mud came a low, distant rumble. The kind that means the ground isn't done yet. The rumble rolled under our feet like a warning growl from the earth itself. It wasn't loud, not like thunder, but low and deep, the kind of sound that makes your ribs hum. Eloise froze beside me, blanket clutched tight. What was that? Could be more soil shifting, I said, aiming my flashlight toward the far side of the valley. Nothing moved, but the ground doesn't always warn you twice. Chief Miller jogged over from the pump site, radio crackling on his shoulder. You feel that? Yeah, I said. Under the south slope, maybe? He didn't answer right away, just scanned the row of dark houses, the silent floodwater, the cracked clubhouse leaning like a drunk in the moonlight. We keep everyone back tonight, he said finally. No exceptions. I don't want a single soul near those houses until the geotech team gives the all clear tomorrow. You think we'll get more slides? I think water doesn't care what we think, he said grimly. The families sleeping in my barn heard the rumble too. We'd set up cots and blankets, hauled in by the high school football team who kept finding ways to be useful. Kids curled up with dogs. Old folks lay on army cots sipping coffee from paper cups. Pastor Mike read Psalm 46 softly to anyone who wanted to hear, the part about mountains falling into the sea and God being a refuge in trouble. No one argued. Tonight, everybody wanted a little refuge. I didn't sleep. Neither did Eloise, apparently. I found her near the generator around midnight staring at the paperwork Rita Morales left behind. Permit forms, hydrology maps, soil reports with too many numbers. You should rest, I said, handing her half a sandwich. She shook her head. I can't. Every time I close my eyes I hear it. The ground, the water, that table sliding across the floor. I sat across from her on an upturned bucket. You got lucky today. She gave a small, humorless laugh. Lucky isn't the word I'd use. Alive beats the alternative, I said. That shut her up for a minute. Around 2 a.m., the county geotech crew showed up with headlamps and tripods. They drilled test holes along the slopes, muttering about soil density and failure planes. Their lights swung across the mud like slow fireflies. One of them, a guy named Sanders with gray in his beard, came over to me after an hour. You own the parcels along the original creek line? Yeah, I said. He looked at his clipboard. Your dad kept this place mostly natural, right? Trees along the banks, no heavy grading? Right. He nodded toward the filled channel. That concrete plug changed the groundwater flow, backed everything up. Now the soil layers under these houses are wetter than they've ever been. We'll stabilize what we can, but until we get that concrete out, the whole valley's one big sponge. Meaning? Meaning if the weather report says rain, start praying, he said, and walked off. Morning came gray and heavy. Clouds stacked like bruises over the hills. The first excavator arrived before breakfast, crawling off its trailer like a yellow dinosaur. 2 dump trucks followed, chains clanking, brakes hissing. Kids pressed their faces to the barn windows as the operator swung the first bucket into the illegal concrete. It shattered with a crack that echoed down the valley. People actually clapped. Eloise stood stiff beside her husband, arms folded tight. Tom kept checking his phone. Insurance, lawyers, who knows? Brian, the treasurer, muttered about costs until Rita shut him down with one sharp look. Every yard of this concrete comes out, she told the crew chief. All the way to the river. Original grade restored. No shortcuts. He spat into the mud. Yes, ma'am. I walked the edge with Dr. Patel as the machines roared to life. Will this fix it? I asked. Long term? Yes, he said. But the soil under those houses may keep moving. Water changes things permanently sometimes. I watched the bucket bite into another section of the creek, breaking open the gray tomb where water used to run free. Brown runoff surged through the gap, hungry to find its old path again. It'll cut fast, Patel warned. The land remembers where it used to go. He was right. By noon, the trench we opened yesterday had doubled in size on its own, water gnawing at the banks like it was taking back rent. While the machines tore out concrete, volunteers moved families into spare bedrooms across town. My cousin brought a horse trailer and loaded it with furniture from one of the leaning houses. Somebody else brought sandwiches from the diner. It looked almost like a community again, people helping each other without counting the cost. Even Eloise carried boxes. No jewelry, no designer coat, just mud on her boots and silence on her face. I didn't gloat. Truth is, I felt sorry for her. Power's a funny thing, feels solid until the ground shifts. Then you realize it was never really yours. By late afternoon, the machines hit rebar. Big, twisted pieces of metal sticking out of the concrete like broken bones. The crew chief cursed. Whoever poured this used road-grade stuff thick as it gets. Can you get it out? Rita asked. Yeah, he said, swinging the bucket again, but it'll fight us. And it did. Every slab they ripped out made the water surge harder through the gap. The current grabbed chunks of concrete, rolling them downstream like dice. At one point, the operator had to chase a slab with his bucket before it smashed into a tree. Get chains on that, he shouted. Men scrambled through the mud, clipping hooks, dragging debris with the excavator like it was wrestling a monster. Then the rain came back. Not hard, not yet. Just a steady drizzle that turned the whole site slick again. The geotech guy Sanders waved at Chief Miller. We need that water lower before this bank gives. The pumps roared to life again, hoses snaking into the growing outflow channel. I ran sandbags where they pointed, feet slipping, arms burning. Others joined. Teenagers, old men, even Tom Devereaux with his expensive shoes ruined in 5 minutes. Nobody cared about clean clothes anymore. By dusk, half the concrete was gone. Water ran free again for the first time in months, tearing down the reopened channel with a voice like applause. Progress, Dr. Patel said beside me, rain dripping off his hard hat. Yeah, I said. But look. The bank under the first leaning house had started to slump. Just a little. Just enough to make my stomach knot. Patel followed my eyes and swore softly. We need that foundation braced. Tonight. Chief Miller was already on his radio calling for more straps, more anchors, more whatever you've got. The family from that house stood on the road holding trash bags of clothes, watching everything they owned tilt another inch toward the water. The father kept one arm around his wife, the other around his daughter, eyes fixed on the house like maybe he could hold it up by willpower alone. Night fell with the rain still coming steady. We set up floodlights on poles, the beams cutting through mist and diesel smoke as the excavators kept working. It felt like a war zone. Machines growling, pumps thumping, volunteers running sandbags under flashing lights. And through it all, that house kept leaning. By midnight, the straps creaked. The ground under the back deck slumped again. I stood beside Chief Miller watching mud ooze downhill inch by inch. If that foundation goes, he said quietly, the whole thing's gone. Lightning flashed far off over the hills. The straps snapped one at a time. And the house began to fall. It didn't fall fast. That almost made it worse. The house slid the way a glacier moves, slow, unstoppable, with deep groans from its own bones. The floodlights made the rain shine silver as the back deck tore free, splashing into the mud below. People yelled to stay back. Someone screamed a name, maybe a kid's, before the firefighters waved everyone behind the tape. The whole valley went quiet except for the rain, the pumps and the sound of money and memories tilting into the swamp. I stood there soaked through, boots heavy with mud, watching the first $1 million house of the night fold in on itself. Roof shingles cracked, windows blew out with pops like gunshots. The front half of the building clung to what was left of the slope, while the back half sagged into brown water that didn't care one bit about square footage or property values. Beside me, Eloise covered her mouth. Tom put one arm around her shoulders for the first time all week. His other hand held onto a flashlight that trembled just enough for me to notice. Chief Miller barked orders, moving crews uphill before the slope decided it was hungry for more. Stay clear, keep the perimeter back, nobody near that edge. And yet, in the middle of the chaos, the family who lived there started forward. The father, still clutching 2 garbage bags of clothes, lunged toward the sliding house like he could hold it up with his bare hands. Sir, no, a firefighter yelled, grabbing him. It's gone. My tools, the man shouted, voice breaking. My dad's tools are in the garage. The firefighter held him back with both arms. I'm sorry, it's not safe. The man fought for a second, then just stopped. Like something inside him broke along with the walls sliding into the mud. His wife buried her face in his chest. Their daughter clung to his leg, eyes wide and silent. I looked away. Some things you don't film with your eyes. The rain kept coming. Not a downpour, just steady enough to remind us the storm wasn't done yet. County Officer Rita Morales stood under an umbrella near the pumps, phone pressed to her ear, voice sharp over the roar of engines. I caught phrases like state disaster declaration and emergency funds and liability assessment. Nobody was smiling anymore. By 2 a.m., the house was half gone. The roof leaned at an angle that made my stomach clench. The back wall had peeled off entirely, leaving furniture hanging in midair like a dollhouse someone kicked open. A red couch clung to the second floor. A ceiling fan spun slowly in the wind, though there was no ceiling left above it. And on the edge of what used to be the kitchen counter sat a single coffee mug, upright like it was mocking every law of physics holding it there. I couldn't stop staring at that mug. We kept working anyway. The excavators tore at the last chunks of concrete in the old creek bed, bucket arms swinging like angry giants in the floodlights. Every piece ripped out let the water run faster, carving the channel deeper, carrying mud and splintered wood downstream toward the river where this mess would eventually empty out. Dr. Patel stood beside me, rain dripping from his hard hat. Once this water has its path back, the soil can start to dry, he said. But this slope? It'll never be the same. I nodded. Neither will they. He didn't have to ask who I meant. By dawn, the rain finally stopped. The valley looked like a war movie. Brown water glinting under gray clouds, machines squatting in the mud, a half-collapsed house sitting like a broken tooth at the swamp's edge. People moved slow now. No yelling, no panic. Just the tired silence of neighbors who had seen too much in too little time. Eloise stood near my barn handing out paper cups of coffee from Pastor Mike's urn. She didn't talk much, didn't boss anyone, just poured coffee for cold hands like it was the only thing left she could do right. Around mid-morning, Rita gathered everyone who would listen. Homeowners, volunteers, firefighters streaked with mud, and laid it out straight. Here's where we stand, she said, voice carrying over the pumps. The illegal fill is 90% removed. The water's moving again. That reduces flood risk for the next storm. But slope failures are still possible. We have geotechnical crews coming with drill rigs this afternoon. We'll stabilize what we can. But the state is declaring this a disaster site. That means inspectors, insurance adjusters, and yes, lawyers. Nobody said anything. Long term, she continued, this will be lawsuits, repair plans, and a full restoration of the creek to its original channel with native vegetation, and someone, she looked right at Eloise, then at Tom, is paying for all of it. Tom nodded once. Understood. Brian the treasurer opened his mouth, then closed it again when Eloise shot him a look sharp enough to cut steel. Maybe she was finally learning silence. For a few hours we all worked side by side, hauling sandbags, clearing debris, checking on families camped in my barn. Kids carried bottled water to firefighters. Teenagers dragged fallen branches off the access road. Even Tom rolled up his sleeves to help stack lumber pulled from the mud. It didn't erase what happened, but it felt human again. Then, just after lunch, a shout went up from the far side of the valley. I grabbed my jacket and jogged over, heart pounding, because voices only sound like that when something's wrong. And sure enough, a crack had opened in the ground uphill from the second leaning house. Not big, not yet. Just a jagged line in the wet soil, running straight toward the foundation like a fuse waiting for a match. Dr. Patel swore under his breath. The slope's still moving. Chief Miller was already waving people back, yelling for ropes and straps and every anchor they had left. Because if that crack kept going, we weren't just losing another house, we were losing the whole hill. The crack in the hill wasn't loud. That somehow made it worse. No thunderclap, no warning roar, just a slow, steady tearing sound as wet soil pulled apart grain by grain. Like the earth itself was whispering before it broke something important. By the time I scrambled up the slope with Chief Miller and 2 firefighters, the split had lengthened another 3 feet. It ran like a scar through the backyard of the second leaning house, straight toward the cinder block foundation where a family photo still hung on the living room wall. Back everyone up, Chief Miller shouted, voice sharp over the groan of pumps and excavators. 50 feet minimum. Move cars off this side road now. People ran, kids clutching blankets, a man dragging a plastic bin full of documents. The family who lived in that house stood frozen on the grass watching the crack creep toward their front porch like they couldn't quite believe the ground they mowed every Sunday might kill them. I found the father first, a tall guy named Mark, whose hands shook around a set of truck keys. Hey, I said, gripping his shoulder. You need to get your people off this hill now. He swallowed hard. Everything we own is in there. I glanced at the house leaning over the widening scar, one back corner already sagging toward the valley. Everything you own can be replaced. They can't. His wife's face crumpled. 2 kids clung to her waist, eyes huge and silent. Mark nodded once, then twice faster, like he was rebooting. Okay, he said hoarsely. Okay, we're going. By then the geotech crew had scrambled up with tripods and measuring rods. Sanders, the gray-bearded one who never sugar-coated anything, stuck a probe in the crack and muttered, "She's moving 6 inches an hour, maybe more under the surface." "Can we hold it?" Chief Miller asked. Sanders shook his head. "Not without cutting weight." Meaning get people out, get valuables out, then get ready to lose the structure. That word, lose, hung in the wet air like smoke. The volunteers worked fast. Teenagers hauled boxes. Neighbors grabbed photo albums, clothes, the dog bed with the muddy paw prints still on it. I carried out a grandfather clock with Mark, and nearly slipped twice on the tilted floorboards. "Leave the fridge," someone yelled from the doorway. "Like I'm carrying a fridge," Mark panted, sweat mixing with rain on his face. We set the clock on the back of a pickup already piled with mattresses, lamps, and a plastic tub labeled Christmas. His wife handed me a shoebox. "It's my grandmother's," she said. "Please." I tucked it under my arm like it was gold. Meanwhile, down in the valley, Eloise stood in the mud watching the second house tilt the way she'd watched the first one collapse the night before. She didn't speak, didn't bark orders, didn't defend herself when people whispered about permits and lawsuits. She just stood there under a gray sky, blanket around her shoulders, eyes fixed on what her HOA vote had set in motion. Tom hovered close but said nothing either. Maybe there wasn't anything left to say. By mid-afternoon, the crack had reached the front steps. The firefighters wrapped the whole structure in rescue straps anchored to 2 massive oaks uphill. The nylon bands stretched tight as guitar strings. "Will that hold it?" someone asked Chief Miller. He didn't answer right away. "Long enough to keep people safe," he said finally. "That's the only guarantee." The county excavator operator parked his machine on firmer ground and climbed out, hard hat streaked with mud. "You want me to push it in?" he asked Rita Morales quietly. She blinked. "Push what?" "The house," he said, nodding toward the tilting structure. If it's going anyway, better to control the fall than let it take half the hill with it. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Sanders, the geotech guy, said, "He's right. A sudden failure could trigger the slope above it. Better to choose where it lands." Rita exhaled slowly. "All right, but not until everyone's clear." We cleared them. The family, the neighbors, the volunteers carrying lamps and shoeboxes and muddy bags of clothes. Mark stood with his wife and kids beside my barn, all of them dripping, none of them speaking as firefighters stretched caution tape farther back. The excavator crawled forward, tracks grinding in the muck. The operator, somebody's uncle from the next county, lined up his bucket against the back corner of the house. People watched from the road, silent except for the rain ticking on umbrellas. The operator looked at Chief Miller. Chief Miller nodded once. And with one slow, decisive shove, the machine pushed. Wood splintered. Windows blew out in sharp pops. The whole structure groaned like a living thing before sliding off its foundation and down the slope in one long, shuddering collapse. It hit the mud below with a wet, final crash that sent brown water fanning out across the valley floor, gasps, a few cries, and then silence again except for rain dripping from broken gutters sticking up like bones. The slope held. For now. Sanders checked his instruments, shoulders loosening a fraction. That took the weight off. Might save the rest of the hill if we get it covered before nightfall. Rita was already on her phone calling for tarps, gravel, anything to keep the raw earth from soaking up more water. Chief Miller walked over to the family who'd just lost everything. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Mark nodded, jaw tight, arm around his wife. The kids leaned against both of them, eyes wide and empty. I spent the next hour hauling whatever was left from the yard, bikes, potted plants, the mailbox with their name still on it. One of the kids handed me a stuffed bear missing an ear. "Can you wash him?" she asked. "Yeah," I said softly. "I can." By evening, the rain finally quit for good. Sunlight broke through ragged clouds shining on the wreckage like a spotlight on a stage after the actors have left. 2 houses gone. 3 more still standing but scarred, leaning decks, cracked driveways, water lines halfway up their walls like rings in a bathtub nobody drained. That night volunteers laid giant tarps across the raw hillside, anchoring them with sandbags and ropes. The fire crew strung lights so the geotech team could keep working after dark. I ran cords from my generator, handed out coffee, checked on kids sleeping in the barn loft. We were all so tired we didn't even talk much anymore. Just worked. Sometime after midnight, I found Eloise sitting on a folding chair near the mud line, staring at nothing. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. "They hate me," she said flatly when I walked up. "They hate what happened," I said. She shook her head. "No, they hate me. And maybe they should." I didn't answer, because I didn't know yet if she was wrong. The next morning, the engineers brought heavier equipment. Drill rigs, soil anchors, the kind of machines that make a hill stop moving whether it wants to or not. But before they could start, one of the volunteers jogging back from the far side of the valley pointed toward the remaining houses with a pale face. "You better come see this," he called, because a new crack had opened overnight, and this one ran straight under the clubhouse itself. The new crack didn't just run under the clubhouse, it ran like a black vein across the lawn, through the flower beds the HOA once bragged about in their glossy newsletter, and straight under the slab where the clubhouse kitchen sat. The same kitchen where they held wine tastings and holiday parties, and where Eloise once told me my muddy boots didn't match the decor. Now the earth didn't match anything. When I reached the site with Chief Miller and the county crew, the crack had already widened enough that you could see the dark, wet soil underneath. A shovel handle stuck in the gap vanished all the way to the hilt. "This whole slab is floating," Sanders, the geotech guy, said grimly, running a measuring tape across the gap. "The soil's liquefied beneath it. One good shake and the whole building could pancake." "Anyone inside?" Chief Miller barked. "Just insurance adjusters," a firefighter said. "Get them out now." By the time the last adjuster grabbed his briefcase and ran for his truck, the ground made a sound I'll never forget. A low, hollow thunk like someone slamming a door deep underground. Then the slab tilted. Not much, just enough to make everyone on site stumble the same direction like drunks. "Back!" Miller roared. "Everybody back!" People scrambled across the mud, slipping on wet grass as the whole south wall of the clubhouse cracked straight down the middle. The gutter tore free with a screech, twisted once in the air, then crashed into the mud below. Eloise stood 50 feet away, blanket tight around her shoulders. She didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched the building that had been her kingdom shudder on its foundation like it was tired of holding up all her plans. Tom finally grabbed her elbow. "We need to go," he said, low and firm. She pulled away, eyes locked on the clubhouse. "I held meetings there," she whispered like she was talking to herself. I made speeches there. Not anymore, I said, coming up beside them. You stay close to this edge, you're going in with it. She looked at me then. For once, no fight in her eyes. Just something empty. The excavator operator, the same guy who pushed the last house down, climbed into his cab and swung the bucket toward the building. We dropping it? He asked Chief Miller through the open door. Miller hesitated. Rita Morales stepped forward, voice cutting through the rain. Do it. Controlled demo before it takes half the hill. The operator nodded once, revved the machine, and drove straight toward the clubhouse like a soldier going to war. The first hit took out the corner wall with a crunch that echoed down the valley. The second made the roofline sag. By the third, the whole building groaned like a living thing, then folded in on itself in a spray of splintered wood, cracked drywall, and one very expensive chandelier that exploded like fireworks when it hit the mud. People gasped. Someone clapped once sharply, like this was justice. Eloise didn't move. Tom finally put an arm around her shoulders. She didn't shrug him off this time. When the dust settled, the clubhouse was nothing but a heap of wet boards and broken windows sliding slowly toward the same swamp, where 2 houses already lay half buried. 3 buildings gone now. Millions of dollars of community property erased in 48 hours by water, mud, and pride. And the rain clouds gathering over the hills promised more. We spent the rest of the day covering the fresh scars with tarps and sandbags. The drill rigs hammered steel rods into the hillside to hold what was left together. Dump trucks hauled in gravel for drainage trenches. It looked less like a neighborhood now and more like a construction site after an earthquake. Families who hadn't already evacuated moved into motels across town. My barn stayed full, kids, dogs, a few elderly neighbors who had nowhere else to go. Emily Carson, the school teacher, made lists of who needed what: medication, blankets, hot meals, rides to work, and in the middle of it all, Eloise started helping. She didn't make speeches. She didn't give orders. She just carried boxes, handed out water bottles, and checked on kids like she'd finally remembered the point of having neighbors in the first place. That night, the county held a meeting under a giant canvas tent lit by string lights. Not in the clubhouse. What was left of that still smoldered from where somebody lit the broken beams for warmth. Rita Morales stood at the front with a clipboard. The state's declaring this a formal disaster area, she said. That opens up emergency funds, but it also means mandatory evacuations if tomorrow's storm hits as predicted. Evacuations? Someone shouted. Rita didn't flinch. The soil's unstable. If we get another 2 inches of rain on top of this, we can't guarantee any of these remaining homes stay standing. Murmurs rolled through the crowd. We'll finish removing the rest of the illegal fill tomorrow morning, she continued. After that, it's up to the weather and the hill. Eloise stood and cleared her throat. For the first time since this started, people actually looked at her without open anger, just tired curiosity. I was wrong, she said simply. Her voice shook but carried. I thought making things pretty mattered more than listening. I thought control mattered more than wisdom. And now? This. She gestured toward the ruins beyond the tent. No excuses, no speeches. Just that. And for once, silence didn't feel like judgment. It felt like agreement. But the weather didn't care about apologies. Just after midnight, the wind shifted cold. The air smelled like rain coming hard. I was stacking sandbags along the lower road when lightning flared far off over the hills, turning the valley white for a heartbeat. The storm was back. And this time, it was bringing more than rain. The first thunderclap hit like a warning shot across the valley. Dogs barked in my barn. Kids woke crying. Volunteers zipped jackets and checked flashlights as the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and raw earth. Chief Miller stood at the edge of the tarp-covered slope, eyes on the black sky rolling in over the hills. We're out of time, he said. Beside him, Rita Morales was on the phone with the state emergency office. We still have 3 homes occupied, she said sharply. Yes, I know it's midnight, I don't care. We need mandatory evac orders before this storm breaks or we're hauling people out in the dark. The wind snatched her words and threw them down the valley like scraps of paper. I walked the upper road where families packed what they could into truck beds and SUVs. Kids carried armfuls of stuffed animals. Neighbors grabbed boxes of photo albums, heirloom quilts, the kinds of things insurance checks don't replace. Emily Carson checked names off a clipboard, hair plastered to her face by the mist blowing sideways. We've got rooms at the high school gym, she told one family. Cots, blankets, hot meals. Just get there. Don't wait. Jake, someone called. I turned to see Mark, the man who lost the second house, helping his wife lift a cooler into the back of a borrowed pickup. You staying? He asked me. Someone has to keep the generator running, I said. He nodded once, rain dripping off his hat brim. Be careful. This hill wants to eat everything. By the time the first sheets of rain hit, only 3 houses still had lights on. Eloise stood in front of one of them, arguing with her husband. "I'm not leaving," she snapped. Tom pointed toward the ruined clubhouse, the collapsed houses, the mud scars running down the slope like open wounds. "Eloise, look around you. We've lost everything but the walls still standing. You want to gamble those too?" "This is my home," she shouted over the wind. "It's wood and drywall," he shot back. "The people are your home. The rest is just things." She froze at that, rain streaking her face, blanket whipping in the wind like a flag surrendering. The county trucks rolled in with sirens off, lights flashing silent blue. Deputies went door to door under the pounding rain. "Mandatory evacuation," they told everyone. 5 minutes to grab what you can. After that, the road closes. Nobody argued, not after what they'd seen fall already, except Eloise. She stood on her porch with the rain in her hair, watching deputies carry her boxes to the road. "This was supposed to be safe," she whispered when I walked up. "A community. A dream." I looked at the tarps snapping over the raw hillside. Dreams built on mud don't last long. She flinched like I'd slapped her but didn't answer. By 1 a.m., the storm was in full rage. Rain slammed the valley sideways, a solid wall of water that turned every tarp seam into a gutter. The pumps thumped steadily, trying to keep up as runoff roared through the reopened creek channel. Lightning split the sky, blinding white over the black hills. Then the wind hit. It came screaming down the valley like a train, toppling one of the work lights, snapping ropes off sandbags, sending a metal trash can lid spinning into the dark like a coin tossed by God himself. "Secure that edge," Chief Miller bellowed, as volunteers fought the tarps whipping loose over the slope. I grabbed one corner with 3 others, mud sucking at our boots as the wind tried to tear the whole sheet free. "Sandbags," someone yelled. 2 teenagers lugged them over, faces pale in the lightning flashes. We dropped the bags on the tarp edge one by one until the wind gave up and moved on to some other corner of the hill. And then we heard it. Not wind, not rain. Something deeper. A sound that came from the ground itself. Low, groaning, almost human. Everyone froze. Lightning flashed again, and the far end of the slope dropped 3 feet in one motion, like an elevator snapping its cables. "The hill's going," Sanders screamed from his truck window. "Back! Everybody back!" Chief Miller roared. The earth let go in slow motion. First the soaked topsoil peeled downward, carrying sandbags, ropes, and 2 small sheds in a single sliding mass. Then the retaining wall behind the third house cracked straight through the middle. The whole slope moved as one slab, mud and water and lumber grinding toward the valley floor with a roar that drowned out the thunder. The third house tilted, groaned, and followed the slope down like it had been waiting for the invitation. Lights still on, curtains still in the windows, a whole life sliding downhill in the rain. People screamed even though nobody was inside. We all just watched, helpless, as the last house on the south end hit the mud below with a crash that shook the ground under our boots. By dawn, the rain was gone. So were 3 homes, the clubhouse, half the south slope, and any illusion that money could hold back water or pride could outvote gravity. The state inspectors arrived with clipboards and cameras. So did the news crews, and the lawyers. Neighbors who still had houses stood in the mud staring at the wreckage while drones buzzed overhead filming what was left of their dreams. Rita Morales walked the site with the governor's aide, pointing at the destroyed creek channel, the collapsed houses, the ruined road. "This wasn't a natural disaster," she told the cameras. "This was human arrogance with a price tag." Eloise stood behind her, hair still wet, blanket still around her shoulders, listening to every word. By afternoon, the state ordered every remaining home on the south slope evacuated until geotechnical crews could rebuild the entire hillside. The HOA signs came down. So did the entrance gates when county trucks hauled them off for better access. It wasn't a neighborhood anymore. It was a cautionary tale with a zip code. And still the creek ran on free again, cutting through the mud like it had been waiting years for this moment. "Water always wins," Dr. Patel said beside me, watching the current carry branches and broken boards downstream. I nodded slowly. So does the truth. But the hill wasn't done yet, because late that evening one of the engineers found something buried in the collapsed mud under the old clubhouse site. Something metal, something big. And whatever it wasn't on any of the building plans. The backhoe stopped digging the moment the bucket scraped metal. It wasn't just a clang. It was a hollow, echoing sound, like hitting the roof of a buried cave. Everyone nearby froze. Volunteers, firefighters, even the geotech guys with their orange vests and clipboards. "What the hell is that?" the operator muttered, killing the engine. Rainwater ran off the broken hillside, trickling into the hole where the clubhouse once stood. The metal surface glistened under the floodlights. Chief Miller climbed down the slope, boots sinking in the mud. He banged on the metal with his flashlight. Clang, clang. Doesn't sound like a tank, he said. More like a container. Beside him, Rita Morales knelt with a frown. There's nothing on the county plans about anything buried here. The geotech guy, Sanders, adjusted his headlamp. Whatever it is, it's big. Runs at least 20 feet toward the road. Neighbors gathered along the caution tape, whispering. First houses slid into the swamp, now this. What if it's chemicals? Someone asked. What if it's a septic tank? Another muttered. What if it's a bunker? That one made people look at each other. The rain started again, just a mist now, but enough to turn the slope slick. The crew rigged floodlights to keep digging, shovels biting carefully around the edges until more metal showed through the mud, curved, riveted, thick. Too solid for septic, Sanders muttered. Too big for fuel. The operator leaned on his shovel. Could be military. My uncle swears they buried ammo dumps out here in the 50s. That set off a fresh round of murmurs along the tape line. Eloise stood in the mud watching silently, blanket tight around her shoulders. For once, she didn't look like the HOA president. She looked like someone bracing for the next blow life might swing her way. Tom came up beside her, hat pulled low. You know anything about this? He asked quietly. She shook her head. I grew up 3 counties over. We bought this land after it was developed. Yeah, he said dryly. And look how well that turned out. By nightfall, they'd cleared enough mud to find a hatch. Big, rusted, bolted shut. The kind of hatch that says whatever's inside wasn't meant to come out easy. Rita radioed the sheriff's department. The sheriff radioed the state emergency office. Before midnight, a truck rolled in with 2 men in hazmat suits who looked like they hadn't smiled since birth. Standard procedure, one said, voice muffled under his hood. Could be old fuel. Could be ordnance. Could be nothing. They ran a detector over the hatch. No radiation, no fumes, no ticking sounds like a cartoon bomb. Probably storage, the other one said finally. But we're not opening it in the dark. We'll bring equipment at first light. So we waited. Neighbors camped in the school gym. The rest of us stayed near the barn where Pastor Mike kept coffee going like fuel for the soul. The rain stopped around 3 a.m., leaving the whole valley quiet except for the creek finally running free in its old channel. Funny how something as simple as moving water can sound like justice. At dawn, the crew came back with a cutting torch. We all stood behind the tape. Residents, deputies, firefighters, county officials, watching sparks shower off the hatch bolts one by one. When the last bolt dropped, 2 men pried the hatch open with a groan of rusted hinges. A smell rolled out, not gas, not sewage, just damp old air that hadn't seen daylight in decades. The first flashlight beam cut through the dark hole, then another. Someone leaned over, squinting. What's in there? Rita called. The man with the flashlight paused a long time before answering. Boxes, he said finally. Dozens of them. Boxes of what? He shined the beam closer. Looks like paperwork. Metal filing cabinets. Some crates. The second man climbed down the ladder they'd rigged, pried open one of the crates and pulled out a sealed tin marked 1954. Inside were folders, blueprints, even old black and white photos wrapped in wax paper. By noon, word had spread through the county. Some kind of Cold War-era storage bunker under the HOA clubhouse site, built in the 50s, abandoned in the 70s, paved over when the land sold in the 90s. And nobody alive seemed to know it was there. Reporters swarmed the site, shouting questions about secret government projects and buried weapons. The sheriff held up both hands. All we found so far are files and crates marked property of U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. State historians are on the way. One reporter pointed at the destroyed homes behind him. So you're saying this whole disaster uncovered a secret military bunker? The sheriff glanced at the mud-choked creek, the ruined houses, the broken clubhouse slab, then back at the reporter. I'm saying this neighborhood was built on land nobody bothered to fully understand. And the land just reminded everybody who's boss. Eloise stood off to the side, hair unwashed, face pale, watching the crates come up one by one. Finally, she looked at me. All this time, she said softly, we thought we were in control. I nodded. And we never were. By evening, the Army Corps confirmed the bunker was nothing dangerous. Just old plans, maps, and records from a dam project that never got built. History lost under mud and arrogance until the storm dug it back up. The neighborhood would rebuild someday. Maybe. But not with the same clubhouse, not with the same HOA board, not with the same illusions about control or property values. or the idea that money can stop water from finding its way home. As the sun set over the wreckage, the creek ran free through its original channel, carrying stormwater, broken boards, and 20 years of pride straight to the river. The wind shifted cold. Eloise pulled her blanket tighter, eyes on the shattered slope where her dream neighborhood used to stand. Maybe, she said quietly, the land just wanted its story back. And for once she might have been right. The days after the bunker discovery felt strange, like the storm had taken not just houses and roads but the rhythm of life itself. No more HOA meetings, no more newsletters about lawn heights or approved paint colors. The fancy entrance gates sat in a heap by the county road, waiting for a truck to haul them off like scrap. And the people? Some stayed in motels, others with relatives. A few lived out of RVs parked along the edge of the valley, watching work crews crawl over the wreckage with drills and bulldozers. The neighborhood wasn't a neighborhood anymore. It was a construction zone wrapped in yellow tape and rumors. The Army Corps guys hauled the bunker files out in crates, stamped with dates older than anybody living here. The state historians looked like kids on Christmas morning, brushing mud off folders stamped confidential like they'd just found treasure. One man in a suit held up a blueprint with shaking hands. This was a dam project canceled in 1957, he said. Would have flooded this whole valley for a reservoir. I stared at him. So, if they'd built it, none of these houses would even exist? He nodded. Irony's thick, isn't it? The families didn't care about blueprints. They cared about insurance adjusters trudging through the mud with clipboards. They cared about county meetings where engineers argued over whether the whole south slope needed to be condemned. They cared about the for sale signs already showing up on the few houses left standing. One by one, people decided this valley wasn't home anymore. Except Eloise. She stayed. Not in the big house. She and Tom moved into a rental across town. But in the meetings. The hearings. The endless planning sessions about creek restoration and slope stabilization and disaster relief funds. She sat in the front row every time, hair tied back, not speaking unless somebody asked her a question. It was strange seeing her like that. Not the queen bee of the HOA. Just another person listening while experts explained how much money and time it would take to make the land safe again. One evening about a week after the storm, I found her standing by the creek. What used to be the creek, now a muddy trench lined with survey stakes and orange flags. They say it'll take 2 years, she said without looking at me, to finish the restoration. Sounds about right, I said. She folded her arms. And the lawsuits? I shrugged. Longer than that. For a while we just listened to the water moving through the channel, free again after being buried under concrete and pride. Finally, she said, I used to think community meant rules, control, making everything perfect. I looked at the ruined hill, the broken clubhouse slab, the houses lying in pieces below. How's that working out for you? I asked. She almost smiled. Guess we were building the wrong kind of neighborhood. The county held a public forum 2 nights later. Engineers showed slides of retaining walls, drainage systems, reforestation plans. The price tags made people whistle under their breath. One man stood up and asked the question everyone was thinking. Even if we fix the hill, why would anyone move back here after this? No one answered. But the land itself had an answer the very next morning. Because before the county crews could finish shoring up the slope, before the restoration plans could even get funding approved, a fresh crack opened. This one wasn't near any house foundations. It ran straight across the main road. The only road in or out. The crack across the road didn't start big, just a hairline running through the asphalt like someone dragged a key across fresh paint. Cars could still pass. Kids riding by on bikes pointed at it, curious but not scared. But by noon, the line had widened enough to swallow rainwater and make the pavement sink a little when trucks rolled over. By evening, the county engineer parked a pickup across it and waved traffic back. This whole stretch is sliding, he told the sheriff grimly. Give it another inch and this road drops into the valley with the rest. The only road in or out. The neighborhood felt trapped all over again. Families still living in rentals across town drove out to grab the last of their belongings before the county shut the place down completely. Pickup beds loaded with boxes, bicycles, potted plants. Dogs sticking their heads out of backseat windows while kids hugged stuffed animals like life preservers. It didn't look like moving day. It looked like retreat. Eloise stood near the barricade, arms folded, watching the last of the neighborhood empty out. Tom was beside her, reading the evacuation notice the county had nailed to a post. No entry beyond this point after 6 p.m. until slope stabilization complete. How long? He asked Rita Morales, who was taping off the road with bright orange ribbon. Months, she said flatly. Maybe longer. We can't rebuild the road until the hill's secure. And the houses? He asked. She didn't answer. By sunset, only county trucks and the geotech crew remained. The rest of us stood behind the barricade watching the empty neighborhood glow orange under the setting sun, the broken clubhouse slab, the houses half swallowed by mud, the raw hillside covered in blue tarps snapping in the wind. The creek ran free through the middle of it all, carrying stormwater and splintered wood down to the river like it had been waiting decades for this chance. Eloise walked over to me as the last car left. "I spent 5 years running this HOA," she said softly. "All those meetings, all those rules." I nodded. "And in the end," she continued, "the land didn't care. It just took back what it wanted." She watched the water sliding through the reopened channel, the tarps fluttering where houses used to stand. "Maybe," she said finally, "we should have listened more. To the people. To the land. To anyone but ourselves." The county closed the road at dusk. No lights in the neighborhood now except the flood lamps over the drilling rigs and the stars coming out one by one over the hills. From the barricade you could see everything. The collapsed houses below, the cracked road above, the creek running free again like it was laughing under the moon, and for the first time since the storm began, the valley felt quiet. Not fixed, not safe, but done. Like the land had told its story and finally stopped talking. Weeks later, the lawsuits came. So did the state grants, the restoration crews, the historians cataloging the bunker files pulled from the mud. But the people never really came back. Too much had fallen. Too much had changed. The neighborhood that once bragged about million-dollar homes and perfect lawns was just a cautionary tale printed in newspapers across 3 counties. On the last day the county let me through the barricade, I walked the edge of the creek alone. The water ran clear now, sliding over rocks that hadn't seen sunlight in years. Grass was already creeping back along the banks. Nature doesn't wait for permission. I stopped where the first house had fallen, the one with the coffee mug that somehow stayed upright on the counter, until the whole kitchen collapsed into the mud. The mug was gone now, buried, carried downstream, maybe smashed to pieces under a bulldozer track. But I kept thinking about it. About everything people try to hold upright when the ground itself says otherwise. Eloise and Tom left the county a month later, sold what was left of their land for pennies to a restoration trust that planned to turn the whole valley into protected wetlands. No houses, no clubhouse, just water, grass, and sky. The last time I saw her, Eloise shook my hand with calloused fingers from weeks of hauling boxes and filling sandbags. "We should have listened to you," she said simply. I shook my head. "You should have listened to the creek." That night, long after the county trucks left and the last floodlight clicked off, I stood at the barricade looking down at the empty valley. The wind moved through the grass where million-dollar homes once stood. The creek whispered over the rocks like it was telling the hills a secret, and the road behind me cracked one final time, cutting the place off for good. "Where are you watching from?" And after seeing pride, money, and concrete washed away in a single season, would you rebuild on the same ground? Or let the land keep what it claimed forever?